Open your Bibles to the Old Testament, Numbers 13, book of Numbers 13 in the Old Testament, verse 22. Numbers 13:22. I'm going to give you a few moments to get there. Up to this point in this teaching was Joseph Imhotep, which we really haven't got to Joseph yet. Been laying down a traditional timeline or a time model. And I've said that the traditional time model that historians and archaeologists, professors, you name it, needs some drastic revisions. And more people in that academic community are starting to realize that. They've been off. They dated things incorrectly by using a model that is totally false. And I've given you the reasons why in the past teachings. And with the age of the internet and other communication means, it's hard to keep that a secret any longer. It's getting harder and harder for the stubborn. Let's just group them all into historians right now. Historians to make the change, even though the change is necessary. And if you're Egyptologists, especially Middle Eastern Egyptologists, you'll refuse and you'll fight for that change never to happen, because it would definitely show to the world, the believing and non-believing world, that, hey, the Bible was correct all along. So some drastic revisions need to take place. And there's really only two options. Either we push the era of Abraham further back into history, which would throw everything off in the timeline, the Bible chronology standard that is followed. It would put it in a tailspin. And people just go nuts, because if you could prove that the Bible's timeline, give or take 50 to 100 years now, is off by that drastic of time, then they'll leave a lot of gaps in biblical history that cannot be answered. We would totally be clueless, which would bring a lot of doubt into the scriptures on how correct and how trustworthy they can be. We don't need to do that, because that's not the problem. We don't need to push Abraham further back into history. What needs to be done, and this is what even the non-Christian world, the secular world, has recognized, we need to pull Egypt's history drastically forward. And they've been slowly doing that. As I mentioned before, you go back 30 or 40 years, they were putting Egypt's history beginning at somewhere around 5000 BC, and then it started creeping up, in some places somewhere between 2500 and 3500 BC now. So they're drastically making that changes, getting closer and closer to the Bible chronology that is set forth that we read in the scriptures. But there's a strong resistance to make any more changes. Now with that, let me continue reading what I've been reading from. Well, before I even get there, there's always some curious passages in the scriptures. Now you gotta ask why. why are they placed there? Why is the information placed in a certain spot in the scriptures or section? And the follow-up question to that would be, not only why are they placed there, but what's the purpose? And most people go throughout their lifetime never understanding what the purpose sometimes is, because it's just too hard to decipher what the purpose is. Numbers 13. Now this is where the spies explore Canaan. The children of Israel are still out in the desert, and Moses sent the spies to explore Canaan. And they went up and searched the land. And in verse 22, and they ascended by the south, and came unto Hebron, where Ahaman, Shashai, and Tamar, the children of Anak, were. Okay. So far, no problem understanding. They went south and they came upon Hebron and the other locations where the children of Anak dwelled. Nothing hard to understand about that, and you can figure out where these locations are, so nothing confusing yet. Then, in parentheses, the rest of the verse. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And then it goes on, and they came upon the brook, Eshcol, and so forth. Why in parentheses in the scriptures here we have out of nowhere really? It really doesn't even fit in if you really think about it. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. We're not even talking about anything that happened in their recent present when this was happening. So why is this in there? You ever ask yourself why? Why was it pertinent to know this information? Now, Zoan is the biblical name of Tanis, or Tanis. Tanis. Write that down. And by the way, if you can get it ready, the map of Egypt that we've been using, get it ready so when I ask for it, you can put it up. And they ascended by the south and came up to Hebron, where Ahaman, Shashai, and Tamal, and the children of Anak were. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Strange, isn't it? Why that's inserted there. And then it leaves it. It doesn't go on to explain anything else about it. It just leaves it there. Just leaves it there hanging on the shelf. I don't think it's there to fill pages. I think everything you find in God's Word is there for a purpose. We might not know what the purpose is after reading it for one time or 100 times. But that doesn't mean there's not a reason for it being there in the first place. Everything in God's Word is there for a purpose. And as I'll read to you, that purpose is to give us, in a biblical sense, a date of when all these things were happening. Because it's important to know that Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt, or Tanis. You got the map? Put it up. If you look at the top portion of that map, which is Lower Egypt, and then you have the dividing line and then you have Upper Egypt. Lower Egypt is in the north there, and you see right there by the delta, close to the Mediterranean Sea, Tunis. You see that? You see where it says Lower Egypt? Just go north of that and to the left. And that is Tunis. That's what Numbers 13 is referring to. Hebron was built 7 years prior to Tunis or Zoan. So, with that, let's read. You come back to me. With that information, let's try to locate the time of Abraham's visit to Egypt. Now I'm going to go to the book of Jubilees next. You have a copy, you can follow along with me. I'll be in chapter 13 in the book of Jubilees. Let me just read that to you. As we try to establish the time period that Abraham visits Egypt. I'm in the book of Jubilees, chapter 13, verse 9. And he arose from there and went toward the north. Now, some believe, and I believe this is true too, that there was a translation error here, and it should be southward. And he came to Hebron. And Hebron was built at that time, and he dwelt there 2 years in the land to the north of Baalat. Now, who is he? Still called Abram, which will eventually be Abraham, is what we're referring to. And he dwelt there 2 years in the land to the north of Baalat. And there was a famine in the land. And Abraham went into Egypt in the 3rd year of this week. And he dwelt in Egypt 5 years before his wife was torn away from him. Now in the book of Jubilees we have a time period, because you read the scriptures, it sounds like they get there, they're not there very long, and then they got the problems because Abraham lied, kind of, not really fully lied, because Sarah was his half-sister. But that's another story for another time. But anyway, and then next thing you know, Pharaoh's kicking them out. And it happened quite rapidly. Well, that's not how it went down, my friend. And I told you that last time. There's other sources too. This source says 5 years before his wife was torn away from him, Pharaoh wanted his wife. And she came into his courts. Now, we don't know the exact period of time she was there, but we know that while she was there, plagues start coming. The book, I think it was Jasher, writes that she prayed, and plagues came and affected the house of Pharaoh, and next thing you know, Pharaoh gets gets a good understanding of why this is really going down, because the truth finally was revealed, and he kicks out Abraham and his wife, and they left very wealthy. Now, this reads, and Abraham went to Egypt in the 3rd year of this week, and he dwelt in Egypt 5 years before his wife was torn away from him. But Tunis, or Tunis, which I showed you in the map, or Zoan in the scriptures, in Egypt was then built in the 7th winter after Hebron. So we have the same thing being said here, but this case in the book of Jubilees. And it happened when Pharaoh seized Sarah, the wife of Abram, the Lord punished Pharaoh and his whole house with large plagues on account of Sarah, the wife of Abram. And Abram was very conspicuous by wealth in sheep and oxen and asses and horses and camels, and in manservants, and in maidservants, and in silver, and in gold exceedingly. And Lot also, the son of his brother, was wealthy. And Pharaoh brought back Sarah, the wife of Abram, and sent him out of the land of Egypt. And he came to a place where he had first fixed his tent, at the place of the altar of age, the east of Bethel. And he went and blessed the Lord his God, who brought him back in peace. So here we have established that Hebron was built in the days of Abram. And then the next verse, as I read in the scriptures, and in the book of Jubilee, Abram goes to Egypt. And the reason why, because there was a famine. And we know that Abraham dwelt there for 5 years before his wife was torn away from him. So, if we know Hebron was built, Abraham was living, and we know Tanis or Zoan was built 7 years prior to that, can we piece something together to try to get a better understanding which Pharaoh, which possible Pharaoh, what time period in the Egyptian dynasties was Abraham in Egypt? Went there because, like I said, of a famine. Now I'm going to pick it up where I left off and read to you what others have to say about it. Egyptologists believe the city of Zoan, or Tanis, is the same as its latter name, Tanis, which is located in Egypt in the Nile Delta, which I already showed you. Archaeology, Zoan is very ancient. Historians know that Memphis, or the Hebrew Noph, and On, later renamed Heliopolis, were built during Egypt's first dynasty in Lower Egypt. Reason for this opinion is the ancient identity of Egypt's founder, who was called Menes of Tanis. I favor the theory that this expression was an error in Menes of Tanis. Now put the map up again. Now Tanis, not Tanis, but Tanis, if you go down into Upper Egypt, about almost a third of the way from the bottom, you'll see Tanis and Abydos right there on the left side of the Nile. Just keep it on the map so they can have a chance to locate it. Now this person that's writing says, I favor the theory that the expression was an error and Menes of Tanis, Upper Egypt, was the correct saying. However, even if Menes was from Tanis rather than Tanis, Tanis from Upper Egypt rather than Tanis from Lower Egypt, there still exists other evidence that Tanis/Zoan predated the 13th Hyksos dynasty. A statue of Pharaoh Pepi I, 6th dynasty, was excavated at Tanis or Zoan. How does the 6th dynasty king travel a millennium into his future and deposit a statue of himself in a city that does not yet exist? Obviously, Tanis or Zoan, the one up in Lower Egypt, existed in King Pepi's era. During the Old Kingdom, the 6th dynasty ended the Old Kingdom. Therefore, Hebron plus Tanis or Zoan existed as early as the Old Kingdom. So what this is saying is, it's not placed in a dynasty such as a 13th dynasty, as historians want you to believe, during the Hyksos period. No. At the very least, at the very end of it, it would be in the 6th dynasty, which ended the Old Kingdom period. And it would have been existing in King Pepi's era during the Old Kingdom. So, if you don't place it there, you'll have almost that 1,000-year gap again. Let me continue reading. Therefore, Abram plus Tanis, Zoan exists as early as the Old Kingdom. This places Abraham's visit to Egypt in the year Zoan was founded. Isn't that interesting? Now, Zoan, once again, Tanis in the delta on top of that map you see there on the screen. This places Abraham's visits to Egypt in the year Zoan was founded, sometime during the Old Kingdom. Sometime between the year, by the way, or not the year, but the dynasties, from either dynasty, I'll give it a range from dynasty 3 to dynasty 6. Or it could possibly be even earlier in the early dynastic period, to tell you the truth, of dynasties 1 and 2. But it surely wouldn't go past dynasty 6. Now, to this point, we have successfully initiated the first thread of evidence which will eventually become ironclad fact. The life and times of that great Hebrew sage Abraham occurred during Dynasty 1 as an early period of Egypt's history, and not 1,000 years later as traditional history teaches. Now let's return to the ancient, come back to me. Now let's return to the ancient Egyptian historian Manetho, who provide another thread in our web of evidence against modern historians and in favor of the biblical account as it was recorded by the Hebrew sages. In the statement we saw earlier, Manetho parallels the so-called pyramids built near Hokami with a time of great famine. It is worthy of repeating here. By the order in Manetho, this king appears as Unephis, also named Ato or Uadji, the fourth king of Dynasty 1, whose time was a great famine, and who built pyramids near Hokamia, or in Armenian, Ho. The Bible also reports that Abraham went into Egypt because of severe famine. In Genesis 12:9, it reads, "There came a famine in the land, so severe that Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while." Since the Bible specifies that Abraham visited Egypt during a severe famine, and Manetho mentions a great famine, connecting it with pyramids built by the first dynasty's fourth king, I propose that Abraham and his wife Sarah journeyed to Egypt at precisely this point in time. Incidentally, this combination of facts strongly increases the probability that Abraham actually did introduce the ziggurat design in Egypt, and Manetho called them pyramids. The first king called Pharaoh. There are still other hints that mid-First Dynasty is the period when Abraham visited the land of the pharaohs. During that dynasty, the title of the king was Mena, Menes, or Min. As we saw, about midway through Dynasty 1, the title of the king became Pharaoh, spelled, by the way, P-E-R-A-O. Pharaoh, P-E-R-A-O, a name which was also associated with the start of the second dynasty at Memphis. Today there remains an interesting story about the first Egyptian king called Pharaoh. It is found in an ancient Hebrew writing called the Book of Jasher, which means Book of the Upright. Extant in two versions, one obviously corrupt, the other reasonably authentic. This book does not appear in our modern Old Testament Bibles, probably because to the Hebrews it was not considered sacred, but was merely a history book. Scripture does, however, quote Jasher twice, in Joshua 10:13 and 2 Samuel 1:18. This old Hebrew book tells us about one Rikayon. Rikayon, spelled R-I-K-A-Y-O-N. There's a lot of crazy theories out there, by the way, of who Rikayon was. Some believe it was Job. Some believe it was Abraham. Some believe it was some other Pharaoh. This old Hebrew tells us about one Rikayon. By the way, out of nowhere in that story too, in the book of Jasher, as explaining what Abraham was doing, you have this story inserted into that book. Strange too, isn't it? He resolved to go to Egypt during the reign of Anom, king of Egypt. That's A-N-O-M. When Rikayon first arrived in Egypt, he nearly starved awaiting an audience with the king. So he used trickery to get recognized. He impersonated an officer of the king and recruited an army to guard the burial grounds of a nearby city. Think about that. He nearly started awaiting an audience with the king, so he used trickery to get recognized. He impersonated an officer. Remember, supposedly he didn't have much. So he impersonated an officer of the king, and he starts recruiting an army to guard a cemetery, of all things, to a nearby city. Thereupon he charged a tax to all who wished to bury their dead and sent the tax money to the king. So he didn't even keep the money. He just wanted to get the king's attention. So he impersonates to be an officer in the king's army. And then he charges a tax to anybody that wanted to use the burial grounds to bury their dead. Thereupon he charged a tax to all who wished to bury their dead and sent the tax money to the king. Rikayon soon became very popular with both the king and the people. You talk about something that's, you would classify that kind of act and compare it to something like the mafia would do. Think about it. Whoever this Rikayon was, he was using mafia tactics. But he was not keeping the money. He was sending it on to the king. In Jasher 14:16 it reads, "And the king answered and said to Rikayon, Thy name shall no more be called Rikayon, but Pharaoh." So up to this point, what this is saying, a king was called a king, or whatever the title was for the king. But they weren't called pharaohs. But after this point, this king did not eliminate Rikayon. And if you read the whole story, he kind of admired him. And he sure made him money. Governments will always be governments. And the king answered and said to Rikayon, Thy name shall no more be called Rikayon, but Pharaoh, to get paid, to exact. That's what it means. Shall be thy name. To get paid, to be exact. Shall be thy name, since thou didst exact a tax from the dead. That's in Jasher 14:16. After the king's son, Osiris, spelled O-S-W-I-R-I-S, which some think is just Osiris but spelled differently, he became king, Rikayon was made a governor. Then the book of Jasher says Rikayon snatched up the whole government. And Rikayon cunningly usurped the government of Egypt in Jasher 14:31. Next, Jasher clearly parallels the time of Rikayon with both Abraham and the heavy famine of Abraham's time. In Jasher 15, verse 1 and 2, it reads, And in that year there was a heavy famine throughout the land of Canaan, and the inhabitants of the land could not remain on account of the famine, for it was very grievous, and Abraham and all belonging to him arose and went down to Egypt. And the famine is confirmed. We have now accumulated 5 separate reports, all from unbiased sources, which connect Abraham to Egyptian kings in a time of great, heavy, severe famine. 2 books, Jubilees and Jasher, 1 historian, Manetho, and 2 chronological records, Genesis and Numbers. Our thread of evidence is now becoming a strong string. And it's entirely reasonable that there is no it is entirely reasonable that there is no mention of Rehoboam's king Anom, A-N-O-M, in Egyptian kings list. Egyptian lists make no mention of Hebrew names. However, they do say that the reigning king during that identical period of time was Atto, or Unephis, the 4th king of Dynasty 1. Is this Atto the same as Jasher's Anom? This Hebrew name Anom is easily transposed to Amon, A-M-O-N, the Egyptian god of Thebes in Upper Egypt. The Hebrew Jasher says that Anom's, A-N-O-M-S, son was Osiris. You remove the letter W, Osiris spelled O-S-W-I-R-I-S, and you remove the letter W and we achieve another Egyptian god, Osiris. O-S-I-R-I-S. Excuse me. The legend of the Egyptian god Osiris shows that he was an Egyptian king who was tricked and killed by Set, S-E-T, and Set usurped the kingdom. This is exactly what Jasher, Book of the Upright, said of Osiris. If the ancient tales are somewhat factual, then Anom's son, Osiris, was Ato's son, Hesepti, also known as Eusebius in Greek, according to the Egyptian kings list. The evidence indicates that Abraham arrived in Egypt during the famine of Atto, or Anom, and that during his stay he saw King Atto, Anom, die and his son Hesepti / Osiris ascend the throne. Abraham was likely still there when Rekayon / Seth usurped control of Egypt from Osiris. Historically, it is known that the capital of the first dynasty was moved from Memphis, Lower Egypt. You can put it on the map again. Lower Egypt, Memphis, right there on the upper portion of that map, the dividing line, just above it. Historically, it is known that the capital of the first dynasty was moved from Memphis to Thebes. Now, that's in Upper Egypt, which is the southern part of that map. And Thebes is right there by Karnak and Luxor, right there on the river, where it bends considerably. You see there Thebes. Leave it on there for a few minutes. Historically, it is known that the capital of the first dynasty was moved from Memphis, Lower Egypt, to Thebes, Upper Egypt, during the reign of the dynasty's 5th or 6th king. This move was forced upon the first dynasty when Hesepti, Osiris was killed and Rekayon usurped power in Memphis and Lower Egypt. Knowing the book of Jasher had no reason to misdirect us, we may safely conclude that Abram came to Egypt midway through the first dynasty, when the second dynasty gave birth to its first king, called Pharaoh, P-E-R-A-O, Rekayon. This leads us to consider that Rekayon, who seized the government, was the first king of the second dynasty. The kings list say that the first king of dynasty 2 was Kenkins, or Kenku. Was he the same as Rekayon, the first king with the title of Pharaoh, or Pharaoh? Was the formation of Dynasty 2 a direct result of Rekayon's usurping of power in Egypt? We can find further clues which validate this position. Come back to me now. The book of Jasher said that King Anom, or Ato, promoted Rekayon to governor and gave him the new name of Pharaoh. However, we also know that Egyptian records records that Pharaoh was not a governor under a king, but himself was a king. This is confirmed by Egyptologists. They claim the king called Pharaoh, P-E-R-A-O, which means of the great house and is the origin of the biblical name Pharaoh, was frequently named as His Holiness and seems to have stood before his subjects both as God and a ruler. That's according to Egyptologists. Rikayon's government takeover would certainly explain how the title for the king changed from Dynasty 1, Mena, Menes or Menes or Min, to the second dynasty's Pharaoh or Pharaoh. Thus we further confirm that Abraham arrived in Egypt in the era where the title Pharaoh or Pharaoh was introduced, and that was probably the start of the second dynasty. Now we have it pinpointed to the start of the second dynasty. Not the 6th, not the 13th, not any in between, which would throw it off hundreds to 1,000 years in a timeline of history. Abraham came in, I believe, I'll take it one step further, at the end of the first dynasty, or between the end of the first dynasty and the beginning of the second. I'll continue a little further. Another set of clues are seen in the sudden introduction of Semitic names of the second dynasty Egyptian kings. For it is Dynasty 2 which introduced Semitic gods to Egypt. Before Dynasty 2, ancestor worship seemed dominant. But by mid-Dynasty 2, things had changed. In later years, Horus, H-O-R-U-S, had come to be known as a symbol of Upper or Southern Egypt. Set, S-E-T, was a god of Lower Egypt. Rikayon could well have been the originator of Set. He came from a foreign land, as did Set, and also began his reign in Lower Egypt, where Set originated. Egyptian legends tell of the rivalry between these two gods, Set and Horus. Two different areas, two different gods competing. It is during the reign of the fourth king of Dynasty 2 where we first see the name Set. Figures of the gods first appear in this reign, where Osiris and Seth are both named as the beloved of Horus. Now they're combined. Could the legends have begun when Rikon or Pharaoh usurped the government from Dynasty 1? This concept is entirely in accord with the evidence already at hand. Review for a moment what we already observed. During its pre-dynastic age, a religion of god-king worship was prevalent in Egypt. When Mena, Menes, or Narmer, another name from, of the first king of the first dynasty came along, he was also referred to as Hor-Aha, H-O-R-A-H-A, Hor-Aha, or Or-Aha, or Horus, H-O-R-U-S. And apparently he was soon deified into the god-king Horus. Eventually, by the time Eunephus, Ato, or Anum, all three the same, took his place as the fourth king, the name Horus had become attached to the office of king, and thus the term beloved of Horus was born. After the king's son Osiris became king, Rikon, who had already become very popular with both the king and the people, was made a governor and awarded the name of Pharaoh. If Rikon was Set, S-E-T, then the ancient god Osiris was probably Osiris, O-S-W-I-R-I-S, the king's son. Obviously, both men would legitimately be called beloved of Horus, and the rivalry would have easily sprung from Rikon's usurping of Osiris's government. All these clues help prove that Dynasty 2 usurped power from Dynasty 1. They also indicate that the usurper was of foreign origin. A foreign troublemaker came in, serving to confirm the accuracy of the book of Jasher's account of Rikon as well. Therefore, I propose that the first king of the second dynasty, Ahui, Ahui, or Bezau, Bezau, or Bezo, some list Bezo as last king of Dynasty 1, was known in Hebrew history as Pharaoh, or Pharaoh, P-A-R-A-O, Re-Gayon. The earth itself provides yet another element in our evidence. The earth itself provides yet another element in our evidence. What could the earth provide as further evidence of the general time frame of Abraham sojourning into Egypt? What could it provide? I don't know if we have time in this particular series, was Joseph and Imhotep, to go back to Re-Gayon, this foreign person, and try to analyze and piece it together who he was, where he came from. If I have time, I'll see if I can fit it in. If I don't, maybe sometime we'll come back in the future. But that's also interesting. I almost hate to leave it, but I have to move on, or else we'll never get done with this series in the near future. We'll see. But what can the earth tell us? What can it provide? What other element can it provide as evidence about the general time frame of Abraham sojourning in Egypt? Do you want to know? Well, if you do, you're going to have to let me know that you want to know. Play another song.